Greetings, everybody. September 2017. I want to talk about consciousness and possession. Consciousness is one of my favorite topics. Possession, it's just something I feel needs to be addressed because I'm hearing a lot about it in the New Age movement. As always, when I talk about consciousness, I like to say that I don't claim to have full understanding or understanding of what consciousness is. However, I also think other people don't. And this includes the, quote, experts, end quote, those people in universities that have PhDs and are doing research in consciousness, or doctors, or anyone else in the New Age movement or the alternative movement, the esoteric occult movements who talk about consciousness. My understanding as it is currently is that this thing we perceive or what we call consciousness is much more elaborate and complex than what we're capable of defining or apprehending and communicating about. So this is my own personal view. And again, I haven't figured everything out here, so some of the things that I'm saying is just where I'm at currently with this topic. And I would say incomplete information. But the reason I'm doing this podcast is because I hear a lot of things on the internet, and I've read some things in books, and I always find that either I completely disagree with what people are saying, especially the materialists, or when I find someone who seems to be on the same track as I am, all of a sudden they sheer in a really weird, awkward direction, and then I'm like, no, that's still not what I'm perceiving. And so I figured I should just put my thoughts out there. Anyways, one of the things that I've been thinking a lot about in the last 10 years is how human beings have been brainwashed, how I've been brainwashed. And I could use myself as a guinea pig here because I am you and you are me, etc. It's easier to use I because it's less offensive and maybe less triggering for you. So I've been brainwashed and my mind's been tampered with since birth. And in some very obvious ways, such as the belief system of my parents and the educational system and television and radio and music videos and religion, big time religion. Religion is the opium of the people, but it's also the brainwashing of the people on a constant state. Culture shifts sometimes rather quickly, one civilization to the next, but what stays in the background is a religion. It goes from generation to generation, pumping in that same message, that same program. So brainwashing, why is that linked to possession? Well, I guess this is a good entry point to talk about some of the concepts here in the esoteric sciences, the ancient knowledge. And one of the things they talk about is thought forms, archons, egregores, and things like that. These thought form or an egregore are linked to beings of thought. Now, I've always asked myself, what's the difference between a non-corporeal being and a thought? And it turns out in some instances, there's a big difference, but in others, the line is very thin because when you have a thought, in our world today, we use the term, I had a thought. We say, wow, I just had a thought, or I just had an idea. Hey, I have this great idea. This is recent in our civilization culture. In other civilization, in other cultures, they don't see it as something coming from the inside. Such as, for example, the Greek philosophers. When they talked about idea, they would say things like, an idea came to me. Meaning, something from outside of me came to me and now it has been revealed inside of me. There's a big difference. And I'm sure you see where I'm going here with the possession, because one can almost say if you're just standing there minding your own business and all of a sudden this idea comes inside of you and infects you infects your consciousness and makes you aware of something, then you've been possessed by a thought form. And it is said that if there are many people, such as people of a tribe or a nation, and all these people are focusing their conscious awareness on one specific thought, then that thought will emanate from them in the, let's call it the ether, or in the matrix, the spiritual matrix, and then will take life of its own. And as these people repeat this exercise of thinking this thought form becomes bigger and stronger. And they will say that if this is done by thousands of people over hundreds of years, this thought form can become a living being, an independent being. And then that being, that thought form being, can infect people. Something related to this in the mystery schools, in the occult knowledge, is the concept of the Akashic record. Now, also what is said is that all thoughts and all actions are being recorded. One can say in the ethers, in a book, they say the Akashic records, it's like things are written down in a book in the spiritual domains. And some people have the gift or ability to go consciously read the information contained in those records. Now, I maintain that we're all doing it all the time. The special gift that is talked about is related to when somebody does it consciously rather than subconsciously. And when one is capable of distinguishing one's imagination from information from the record. This record also some people will call the higher world. The religious folks will say it is the thought of God. There are many names in the New Age movement. They'll call it the universal consciousness or this and that and the other. And the point being that there's information outside of us that we can access. Oh, and when you go and you access this information purposefully, then that's different than when this information traverses you and you pick it up in a possession. And it might seem strange that I call this a possession, but if you think of it differently, if you think that there's a thin line between a being, a thought being, and just a thought or an idea, then one could ask themselves, how do I know that I had an idea that's coming from the, quote, universal consciousness, the Akashic record, or if this idea is not the non-corporeal being whispering in your ear. And if that is a demonic being whispering to you, then you're being possessed through your mind. And then people will refer to possession through the physicality, where your body is being possessed by the energetic form of a non-corporeal being. The Native American shamans talk about when someone has been weakened, they open themselves up to being possessed by spirits that are caught in the in-between world, between life and death. Basically, it is said that some people, when they die, they can die of a very traumatic cause, and rather than simply go where they should be going, they don't realize that they've been killed, and they stick around for a while, not knowing what's going on, and they tend to possess people that are weaker, that have a weak constitution. It is also said that this weaker composition that opens you up, that opens someone up to being possessed, can be a trauma. People that have been traumatized when they were young, for example, can lose a small piece of their soul. At least that's how it's being referred to. And then that small piece of their soul is stuck somewhere, and then they lack soul, and then they can be possessed. I often ask myself, who is doing the thinking? Because I know that ideas come from the outside, and that I know I can be, quote, possessed. And so I have to ask myself at any given moment, who's doing the thinking? And when I search deep inside of me, it seems like there is a constant denomination inside of me. The foundational me that's there. That's the same foundational me that I will have when I dream at night. When I fall asleep and I go into the dream world, the reality around me is completely different, but there's still the same me deep down inside there. Okay, so if there is this foundational me, seems to me it's not very active most of the time because of the layers of brainwashing, of mental programming that have been added onto this foundational me. And then all of the other information that I pick up in real time, kind of like a radio, like the radio doesn't have any information inside the box. It has electrical circuitry and mechanical pieces, but it doesn't contain the songs. It picks them up. So kind of like the radio, I'm picking up all these things and it's constituting my in the now reflections, thoughts, ideas. And so it seems to me I'm like a collection of information that I pick up and that I'm capable of putting into a memory of sort. I can recollect all these little bits of information that have crossed my path, and they keep adding to this foundational me to grow and expand my current conscious awareness. Another thing that needs to be talked about is God, the angels, the archangels, the demonic beings, the lower beings, all of these beings that are talked about throughout the ages. And it includes like Zeus, Apollo, Thor, Krishna, Shiva, Ganesh. There's literally thousands of these gods. And so if there is this thing called God at the tip top of the pyramid, and this God is all-knowing, omniscient, omnipresent, then therefore we would be under the will of God, which would mean that God is directing you, and even if you have this thing called free will, you are still under a plan, which means that you would be somehow possessed by God's will. And then they say we have guardian angels, and these guardian angels can influence us and nudge us in certain directions. They can help us in our life. Well, if they can help us and they could whisper in our ear and they could nudge and make things happen, then we are also under their influence. Now, to add one more layer to all of this, I would like to talk about the medicinal herbs and food. And that's like, what? How does that fit into possession and consciousness? Well, it fits in this way. There are some native shamans that talk about the spirit in plants. And the healers of these First Nations, these shamans, they use a lot of plants to heal. And some of them will say that it is the spirit in the plant that does the healing. See, they don't have this notion, this materialistic notion of chemistry where we try to find a molecule, like it's the coumarin inside of the turmeric that will cause a release of the inflammation of the peritoneal nervous system, blah, 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 right? See, we're very materialistic in our approach. And it doesn't mean that that's not there and happening, but it might not be the cause. For them, the cause of illness and fixing illness is at the spirit level. And so when the shaman gives you a medicinal herb, a plant, it is calling forth the spirit of the plant to come inside you and heal you. You are being possessed by a plant spirit. It sounds very freaky because you're like, hey, wait a minute. You mean when I take my echinacea pill, I'm really calling in a non-corporeal being to possess me? Well, maybe yes. But maybe that's not so freaky, because what I'm trying to relate here in this podcast is that there's a very good chance that all of us are possessed by multiple beings constantly, all the time, beings, also including thought forms, egregores, and archons. Archons is another thought that has become a powerful being, a sovereign being. And if we are all possessed by multiple things all the time, this is what gives you your present conscious awareness, which is laid up on top of that foundational you that perhaps, unfortunately, doesn't really have a lot to say in many instances. And I'll get back to that. But first, I want to finish with the plant medicines. And so, if you take that one step further and you say, well, okay, these plants have spirit, and these spirits, they come inside us and they affect us to heal us. Well, one of the things that came to my awareness is that my conscious awareness is that all plants are, quote, healing, and they all affect consciousness, every single one of them. You don't have to smoke cannabis and go take ayahuasca somewhere in order to modify your consciousness. You could have a zucchini. You could go out there and collect some mint and have a mint tea. Because the plant itself does not matter. It is the spirit in the plant. And all of these spirits, they all share one thing. They all have one thing in common. They are all part of nature, and they are very close to creation, especially the plants that come from the wild. And so I maintain that the key to health and this, quote, healing is actually the act of getting closer to creation, to nature, because we've been artificialized. And it's this artificialization that creates disharmony and that makes our spirit sick. And then in turn, our bodies start to show some symptoms of this disharmony. And anyway, that's pretty deep stuff here. It's much easier to just think about like, okay, go see a herbalist and say, I've got this problem. What do I do? Take this plant. That's much easier. That's just the same philosophy as going to see the pharmacist and saying, I have this problem, and then they give you a pill that comes from the pharmaceutical company. It's the same mojo. Seeking a pill for a problem. That does not heal. That's not a healing process. And another symptom of this quick fix pharmaceutical pill paradigm is the using the medicinal herbs repetitively without learning a lesson. If you are being possessed by a nature spirit that is trying to merge you with creation, then let that be the lesson. Merge with creation, get closer to nature, cease the artificialness that has caused disharmony. But some people get hooked onto the possessions. For example, if somebody smokes cannabis, they will be calling in the spirit in the plant, the marijuana plant spirit, and that will make them feel better, perhaps closer to their higher self. It will affect their consciousness. However, whatever lesson this marijuana spirit is teaching this person has to be incorporated, and the healing has to occur. And so now I want to introduce the idea of food. Now, food has also been artificialized, hybridized, and genetically modified. And do your research, folks, because your cabbage and your kale and most of your potatoes and tomatoes, they're all hybridized. They are not the original genetic stock that came from creation. And my point is this. They can bring you a little piece of nature, but they're not bringing the full palette of creation. Which is why eating wild edibles is much more healing than eating a carrot or a zucchini. But a carrot and a zucchini is also healing, and it will also affect your consciousness. Now, it affects your consciousness perhaps in ways that are unperceivable, only because when you rest in a certain place, then you can't see that place where you are at. And if I use the radio analogy again, if you dial in to 102.5, and that is the place that you live at in your conscious awareness, and if everyone around you is dialing in the same frequency, then we are all sharing a certain reality. We are all consciously aware of a certain reality, and that reality becomes normal. But it is not normal. The reality we have around us is relative. If we would all be dialed into somewhere else, like to 99.5, then we would have a completely different reality, and we would call that normal. And someone who would go to 105.7 or would go somewhere else would be traveling into another reality, which would be seen as being insane. And so the food we eat dials us into a certain frequency or keeps us into a certain frequency, a range of frequencies. And so if you are being possessed by the marijuana or the ayahuasca spirit when you take that plant, is the same when you eat a carrot or you take a potato. And so therefore, not only are you possessed by all of the thought forms, all of the beings, the guardian angels, God, the demonic beings, you are also being possessed by the plant spirits and the animal spirits you are eating. It's a big, huge mishmash of information that's going on top of that foundational you, which already contains layers of brainwashing and mental patterns and mindsets. It's not surprising we're confused. It is pretty confusing. I already hear some of you saying, I don't feel that I'm being possessed. Well, no, you don't feel it. We don't feel this most of the time. But I'm sure if you search deep inside of you, you might come up with some examples where you were possessed, where you said things or you did things and you're like, whoa, that wasn't me. Or it's like, it was the alcohol, or it's the pills that I took. That wasn't me. Well, that wasn't me. Well, who was it? Really? It's a tough question. It's fundamental to think about it, though. Because if you don't, you're just running around executing programs. And the programs you are executing might not be very pretty for others around you and for yourself, ultimately, your spiritual self. All of these aspects need to be taken care of in order to be healthy. And the reason you want to be healthy is because you want to be able to grow spiritually so you could accomplish something worthy of your incarnation, your existence here. Or else you could just have fun in the carnival, but there will be a lot of suffering. And so food, medicinal plants are also part of your conscious awareness and what is possessing you. So the question is, if we're aware of this, what do we do? Can we do anything? Do we just sit back and watch the show? Should the foundational me kick back and watch the freak show? Just make myself some popcorn, be possessed by the corn god, and watch the freak show. Watch myself as I do various things in this world, as I participate in the realities that have been given to me. I don't think that's a very sane thing to be doing. I prefer to be a sovereign being that chooses my path. If at least for one thing that I'm not constantly sick and ill, that's one thing. And second is that I'm not just like this mindless automaton walking around executing programs. It displeases me to think that this is what I should become or this is what I am. So if I know that I'm a stack of mental programs and brainwashing and I'm a mishmash of possessions, then it seems to me that what I should be doing, what the foundational me inside should be doing, is trying to figure out which programs are detrimental to my overall existence and capacity to grow and become a fully mature spiritual human being. So I have to think about it. What are the mindsets that affect me? Pick them apart one by one. Maybe try to remove some mental programs. Try to unbrainwash myself a little bit. Maybe stop and pause before I execute or I say or I even think something to be true. Say, wait a minute, is this really true? Where did I get this information? And then compare this information with my own deep inner experience. Let myself be the final arbitrator. The deep inner self be the final arbitrator. And base it on direct experience, the direct experience of the foundational me. If that makes any sense. And maybe this is something that needs to be said. We could all have this experience at a very superficial level, all these experiences like going to a football game, going to a wedding, having a degree in law school or this or that, all these experiences, traveling to Cancun and this and that, and all these bits and pieces of culture being added on top of us. But what are the direct experiences of the foundational me? And perhaps the sad part is that there might be some people out there that have very little direct experience at that level. It is like the foundational me has not grown in this lifetime. And when people talk about a reincarnation, they say, well, you come back to learn your lessons. You come back to free yourself from your karma. Well, at one point, then, how many times do you want to come back? Are you enjoying this human experience? All of the levels of brainwashing, all of the culture and the civilization is there, and it sucks you into this reality that prevents the expression and growing of the foundational I. And possession and consciousness is at the forefront of this spiritual battle, so to speak. So there are many things here that also can be said. How does one deprogram oneself? It's not that easy to do. It's not like there's lots of information out there. You can't go and take a class on how do I break the brainwash, Unbrainwashing 101. It's the inverse. You go to school and they add layers on top of your reality. They add more mental programming. You join a new age club and they will add layers on top of your programming. You join a religion and they add layers on top of your programming. So where are the clubs that you can join where they will help remove the layers of programming? Perhaps there are no clubs like that. It's like a thing you have to be doing on your own. And to go back to the new age, it is very deceitful because you find out there experts that will perform exorcism and deal with possessions. But really, when you look at who's doing this, well, it's these people that claim to be experts in possession that basically took a 2-weekend training course in California somewhere and got this made-up certificate. And they're just doing this technique on you, and they don't even realize what is going on here, what is consciousness and possession, and how they are even possessed, and their reality has been given to them, and all of this is relative. And this goes back to what I said at the beginning. Who really knows what's going on? I'm talking about this stuff, but I'm still at the observational level for most of this stuff. And some things are on the hot plate being analyzed, but they're not nearly ready to be concluded. Having said that, if reality is relative, then conclusions might also be relative. In any event, the new age, I would say be careful because it's more of the same. Meet the new boss, the same as the old boss. I guess what I'm saying is that there seems to be a tendency to remove a program, but to fill it up with something else. Almost as if we abhor void. We dislike void. We want to replace emptiness with something. But maybe that something we replace it with is just another quick fix. It's another pill, because it seems that if you are going to work hard at removing a possession or removing a thought form or a mental program inside of yourself, then you would want to replace it with more of the foundational you, not another possession. This world we live in doesn't seem to be a world of righteousness. And so therefore, one must conclude that we are being possessed by non-righteous thought forms and non-righteous beings. So those are the ones that you want to keep at check. So anyways, I guess that's pretty much it. There's a lot more that can be said. It would be easier if I was having a conversation with somebody and we could go back and forth and debate certain topics here, certain quote ideas. But as a monologue, it's kind of hard to stay focused and bring everything on the table here. So for now, that's all I have to say regarding possessions and consciousness. All right, folks, be well, take care of your mind and your spirit.